Senator Sampson, good afternoon, sir.
Madam President, thank you for recognizing me. I've been listening to the conversation regarding this amendment, and I think most of my questions have been answered, but I do have a few additional questions I'd like to ask through Madam President.
Please proceed.
First, to the proponent of the amendment, I'm just curious if this particular amendment would affect visitations by family members, or it's only for just the in-person visit of DCF personnel. Through you.
Senator Marr.
This is for the Department of Children and Families addressing a safety plan and in-person visits.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate that, but when it says in-person visits, are we referring to only in-person visits for DCF personnel, or would it restrict in-person visits for family members?
Senator Marr.
The language speaks to DCF and workers and safety plans, does not speak to family members.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate that answer. And the reason why I'm trying to clear it up is because this seems to have a lot to do with the same type of circumstances we experienced during the coronavirus pandemic, where there was a public health emergency declared by the governor. And subsequent to that, I believe that these in-person visits were suspended during that period. So certainly the governor has the power to do that by executive order. But also in-person visits from family members were suspended as well. I had a constituent through that period who was later reunited with their child, but they were separated. The parents were separated from in-person visits with their child for a period of around 6 months. Which is an absurdity in my opinion, and I worked very hard to make sure that we ultimately had a reunification. So I'm just curious. You know, this policy seems to me that it may in fact create the same sort of circumstances, because I don't believe that you can have a parent visiting a child in DCF custody unless there's DCF personnel present. So I think what is happening here is you would be precluding the parental visit simultaneous. And I'd just like some confirmation with that. Is it required that any time a parent is going to visit a child in DCF custody that a DCF person would have to be present? Through you.
Senator Marr.
Thank you, Madam President. The answer is no.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. So if I am a parent who is you know, going through a process with DCF and has not yet been reunified, or the situation hasn't been adjudicated, but DCF now has custody of my child, you're suggesting that I could actually go visit that child even if they're with foster care without a DCF person present? Is that correct? Through you.
Senator Marr.
This bill does not touch home visits. It is only about safety plans that are in place and visiting of the worker with the family that has a safety plan in place. It does not address visits by family members.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. And I appreciate the answers, although we're not getting at what I'm asking, because I think it's quite clear that it's impossible for a parent that does not have custody of their children because DCF has taken custody for them to have visitations with their own children unless there's going to be DCF personnel present. So if you're creating a policy that allows DCF to effectively limit or eliminate those in-home visits for DCF personnel, it's just a matter of extrapolation to understand that you're also restricting those parental visits. I see there's a little debate going on over there. So while that's happening, hopefully I can get just a final clarification. Is it possible, yes or no question, for a parent to visit their child if there is no DCF person present? For instance, if they are being restricted based on lines 15 through 18 of the amendment before us.
Senator Marr.
Stand at ease, please, Madam President.
And we will stand at ease. Senator Marr.
Thank you, Madam President. This only addresses the quarantine. If the child is not under quarantine, they can meet with a family member in a family center where DCF oversees that process. But if a child is under quarantine, in a quarantine situation, they cannot see the parent.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Madam President. All right, I'll just move on to the other aspect of my questioning, which is really, how this works currently and what we're effectively attempting to do with this amendment to change our current statute. Am I correct to assume that the governor would have the power to restrict these in-person visits if there was a public health emergency, for example, through you?
Senator Marr.
Thank you,
Marr.
Madam President. Current law is current law. This does not change current law.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, current law is current law. I think that's a true statement, but if we pass this piece of paper, presumably we're changing the law. Otherwise, what are we doing here? I'm asking how this bill impacts whether or not, well, never mind. The fact of the matter is that I just need some clarification to know what the current law is regarding how this process goes forward currently. So if the governor declares a public health emergency, I would say presumably his powers would allow him to also say that DCF personnel must switch to remote visits during the period if he feels that's necessary. I think that's what's probably happened during the COVID-19 pandemic, and I just love some confirmation of that. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Marr.
This bill does not at all address visits. It's about making sure that the safety plan is in place except under quarantine situations. What we're trying to do with this bill is make sure that children are safer in the home and that it addresses making certain that there are visitors that are DCF workers that are following up on the safety plan and making sure that children are safe, except in the case of quarantine. So it does not address visits, children and parents, and DCF has processes in place to make that happen. This is about making sure that safety plans are followed because of some of what we have seen during the pandemic with families.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President, and I appreciate that answer, but I've moved on from that. I understood that from the first part of our conversation, and what I've moved on to is a conversation about whether or not the governor has the power to tell DCF employees during a public health emergency, subject to 19A-131B, like it says on line 18 of this bill, to say to those DCF personnel, switch to remote visits. Can the governor do that right now? And is that what happened during the pandemic? Through you.
Senator Marr.
Through you, Madam President, yes.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and I appreciate that answer. I wasn't clear about what I'm going for here. There's a few different aspects of this that concern me. I share the desire for these safety plans to exist. I want to make sure that the DCF has got the opportunity to make sure that everyone is, taking proper precautions in the event that there is another type of pandemic or something like that. I completely get that. What I'm concerned with is that we're kind of changing things a little bit with this legislation that is before us. Right now, the governor has the power to declare a public health emergency anytime he wants, and one of my concerns is that he can do that completely and utterly arbitrarily. And he has. We watched as the state of Connecticut was under a public health emergency for years. I think 2.5 years total. We were under a public health emergency that we extended sometimes outside of this chamber, sometimes in this chamber, and sometimes when there was absolutely no reason to do so. In fact, we were told over and over that we were extending the public health emergency just because we wanted to get some federal money, not because there was an actual health emergency in the world. So you understand why I have a concern here, because what this will do is, instead of leaving it in the hands of the governor to say there's a public health emergency and I want to restrict DCF personnel from going into these homes to keep everyone safe, what happens here is they get to do it automatically. So if we have another situation like the pandemic that happened before, and this body and the governor decides to continue public health emergencies well beyond an actual emergency, you will also be restricting the DCF personnel from being able to have in-person visits. And that's what concerns me. And I just don't know what the motivation is behind wanting to do that. I don't know that I have any other questions, Madam President. I want to express this concern very clearly, though, which is that what happened during the pandemic was unacceptable at the time. It was an absurdity. The fact of the matter is that the governor of this state and the majority party decided to carry on a public health emergency well beyond any period of rational review that would suggest that we were actually in some sort of an emergency. And they did that for political purposes. They did that for, maybe even positive reasons to make sure that we were getting the proper federal aid. But there were ramifications to that. And those ramifications were, in many cases, quite negative. I mentioned my constituent earlier. It took them an additional 6 months to be reunited as a family with their child, in a case which I'm happy to discuss offline with anyone in this room, where they should never have been separated to begin with. Talk about the damage to an individual family over the declaration of a public health emergency for reasons other than an emergency. So when I see something like this that says that we're effectively going to even make it easier for in-person visits to go away, it concerns me. You know, a lot of things changed during the pandemic. We had the move towards remote meetings instead of requiring in-person meetings for, boards of eds and stuff like that. And all of that concerns me. And this just seems like a mechanism to me that would, while the underlying bill is very well intended, and I want to support the underlying bill, my concern with this amendment is that what it's going to do is it is going to make it that much easier to restrict the in-person activity from the DCF personnel, and I just don't think that's a very good idea. It can happen now, as we just established. The governor can declare a public health emergency, as it refers to at the end of this language, and it's just a simple additional sentence in his declaration to say that the DCF personnel would also switch to remote visits. To make it automatic via this language, I think, is a mistake. So I'll be opposing the amendment, Madam President. Thank you.
Thank you. Will